Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, The Frequency. A frequency. In the late 1950s, scientists accidentally discovered something that wasn't meant to exist. It was dubbed the frequency. The frequency works on a basis that prolonged exposure increases the signs of the symptoms of paranoid anxiety. For example, somebody who was exposed for 10 minutes would have less indications than a person exposed for 1 hour. This frequency was kept a secret. Should it be revealed, quite a bit of hysteria could be stirred up. Naturally, the scientists responsible for the frequency felt it necessary to test its effects on humans. The first test, which lasted about 20 minutes, showed no immediate effects with the exception of some acute anxiety. Test lasted 2 hours long after going past the 20-minute mark. The subject seemed anxious, as observed in the previous test. For this test, the scientists took extra measures and strapped the subject to a chair. The test continued. After 45 minutes have passed, the subject seemed agitated. They stated that they were being bothered by some kind of fog in front of their eyes. We acknowledged the individual's discomposure, while at the same time took notes on the effects of the frequencies inducing symptoms. 1 hour and 15 minutes on the timer. The subject appeared more distressed. The subject was constantly moaning and whining, while showing signs of delusion. The subject constantly darted his head around the soundproof room at random intervals. About 20 minutes later, the subject began to weep. When questioned by one of the scientists, he complained that these shadowy figures were standing in the fog. It should also be mentioned that the subject stopped moving around to stare at the wall the chair was facing. 15 minutes left. On the timer, the subject suddenly broke into full panic mode. They started rocking and making frantic facial gestures towards the scientists, begging them to end their suffering. They were constantly blathering that the shadows were walking out from the fog, and that they were going to take them. 30 seconds left to tick away. The subject's spastic movements freed them from their prison. They sprinted out of the test room before the scientists could stop them. The subject snatched a scalpel from a surgical table and grabbed the scientist nearest to him. The subject proceeded to drag the blade across the scientist's throat. Ending their life, the subject then dug the scalpel into his own eyes and removed them from their sockets in an attempt to rid himself of the images. Naturally, the tests were scrapped and the research was buried deep in the archives. I put your life at risk by waiting this long to tell you. You see, the so-called frequency is a low and loud hum. One cannot listen to it for too long. Although it's probably too late, considering the time you've been on this site. Try to scare yourself. You're soon to experience what real fear is. Let's review the fact. It is generated in a place which would cause mass panic if discovered. It makes you feel fear and anxiety, and makes a low, loud hum. All seems pretty damn inconclusive to me, but wait, what is that sound coming from the device you are reading this on? The second story, Last Man Alive. One by one, the women file in. Wearing their tantalizing diaphanous gowns, they hold all types of food, which is as culturally diverse as they are. Some type of Asian woman sits on my left, while a large black girl begins rubbing my shoulders. They tell me to eat, to be healthy, to be happy, and I try. At least, I remember it being easier at first, and how I used to fill my stomach with fruit and bread and meat, and then fill my arms with each one of them. I can't remember the last time I saw another man. Day after day, it's just these women, each one more beautiful and kind than the last. What's worse is how happy they all seem. They all smile at me, while they lay me down and take from me what they want. At one time I was more than glad to oblige them, imagining myself to be the luckiest man in the world. But eventually, I had to realize that I was the only man in the world. I'm sure there are others, somewhere, but I'm never allowed to see them. In fact, I'm barely even allowed to see the sky outside. It's a different world out there now. There are fewer buildings and more flowers. Every tree seems to be overflowing with fruit. Nothing like you would have seen before, and of course there are the women walking around, smiling non-stop at one another. A lot of them speak English, I think. I don't exactly talk to them much, because the words uttered while rolling around in the bed are few and short. I try to strike up a conversation, and they just smile like sharks. I've gotten more women pregnant than I can count. I never had kids back in my old life, and now I've probably got tons. Hundreds of girls, I'm sure. I don't want to think about what they're doing to all the boys. Maybe one of them will get lucky and take over my place once I'm too old for this. Knowing each of his sisters briefly and intimately, one by one, even if I'll never know him, I feel sorry for my only son. This isn't what I'd want for anyone. I'm not sure how much longer I can do this before going insane. I'd kill just to see a football game, or to talk about old-fashioned guy stuff again. I don't remember the last time I heard a car or drank a beer. They probably don't even exist anymore. This world belongs to the women. I'm the last man alive, and I'm only for breeding purposes. The third story, splinters. They called me a jack of all trades, and I guess that was right. I was willing to do a lot of things for pay, and manual labor popped up a lot, so when old Miss Lytheby asked me to help her move, I was glad to help. I got money. She didn't have to pay for an expensive moving crew. We all win, right? But the place she moved into was way out of town. I had to drive 3 miles off the beaten path of these woods to reach this place, then load all her crap in through this tiny log cabin store. When I was finally done, it was dark and cold outside, so she made me chop firewood for her. I didn't complain at the time, since she was still paying, after all, but in the process, I ended up with a few nasty splinters all over my hands, glad to finally be done with that job. I went back to normal life, and my extra pocket money was gone within a couple of weeks. The splinters, however, were not. I tried plucking them out with tweezers, but the little bastards hung on. At first I thought nothing of it, but they started to look pretty bad after a while. I guess they got infected, because they started using all types of liquids. I needed to have them in band-aids most of the time, just to avoid disgust. I finally caved in and went to a dermatologist, and he recommended the usual neosporins, peroxide, washing my hands, stop picking at them, etc. But after a week of following those instructions, my fingers just looked worse, not to mention hurt like the devil. Instead of that idiot dermatologist, this time I went to a real doctor. The guy seemed interested, and took some samples of the pus oozing from my skin. He told me he'd get back to me after a while, so I waited. Well, guess what? My fingers were now so swollen that I could barely do anything with them. And no hands means no work, so I had to live off what money I had left. cursing myself for ever working for Miss Life, as if that weren't bad enough. They still hurt, more than splinters should. I had them wrapped up a lot, and I doubt I could even move them anymore. Finally, the doctor got back to me. We got around to meeting each other again, cause he said he wanted to show me something in person. What he ended up handing me was a printout from some webpage about a rare parasite that I'd never heard of. The thing crawls under people's skin and starts eating away at their muscle tissue, generally causing hell for its host as soon as it gets big enough. It lays its eggs in the host's bloodstream so the little baby parasites can get all over the body. The worst thing about these bugs is that they're really tiny. So tiny, they could be mistaken for a splinter.